morning, everyone. I welcome you to our Founders Day Convocation. Please be seated while the university singers perform their first selection. Thank you to the university singers, as always, and their director, Shane Lynch, and thanks also to Tim Gaylord for the music that preceded that. I welcome everyone to Washington & Lee's Founders Day ODK Convocation, students, faculty, parents, staff, and friends here with us in Lee Chapel, and also the many joining us online through the wonders of modern technology, the parents who could not be here, the alumni who will remember their own Founders Day ODK Convocation and maybe their own ODK induction, and especially the members of Omicron Delta Kappa from other colleges and universities who are helping launch ODK's centennial year by watching our ceremony today. We are honored by the presence of all of you. In a moment, I will turn the podium over to Professor Lucas Morel, our keynote speaker, and then to Alvin Thomas, the president of the Alpha Circle of ODK, who will conduct our tapping ceremony. But let me begin by asking us to reflect for a few moments on history. Our Founders Day Convocation is a time set aside by directive of the Board of Trustees of Washington & Lee University, the nation's 9th oldest institution of higher education, to pause and consider the contributions of those who came before us, the values that constitute our inheritance, and the lessons we can draw from the past. On this day, we sometimes reflect on our own university's past, sometimes on the history of higher education, and sometimes on the history of this country. Why, in a busy world with so many demands on our time, is this a constructive use of that precious time and energy? Today, for example, I take note of 3 significant birthdays. One is indeed the 100th anniversary of ODK. Founded at Washington and Lee in 1914, the National Honor Society now has circles at over 300 institutions across the country. It recognizes leadership, and not just leadership, but a particular kind of leadership, one characterized by generosity of spirit and a commitment to others rather than the self. Members of ODK have already demonstrated exceptional personal and intellectual qualities, but one of the most significant lines in their initiation ceremony is this: "You should know that the Laurel Crown Circle is not only a recognition of past exemplary conduct, but that must also be to you a constant inspiration to finer and nobler living, so long as you shall live." Membership in ODK is indeed an honor, but it is also a lifelong obligation. Washington and Lee is proud of its role in the founding of the nation's Leadership Honor Society, proud that Lexington is now the home of its national headquarters, proud that our town and campus will be the venue for this summer's centennial celebration, and proud that even though ODK has forged its own path and established its own distinctive ethos, the university provided the base for that foundation. The other 2 birthdays remind us of the complexity of history and the ironies we cannot avoid. Robert E. Lee, born on January 19, 1807, was president of this institution from 1865 to 1870. He assumed that duty instead of other opportunities more lucrative and less daunting because of a deep conviction that the answers to the nation's division in the aftermath of the Civil War could be found only in an educated citizenry. It is a chapter of his life often lost in the conflicted and tragic one that preceded it. But for those of us who have spent time on this campus, the legacy of his time here remains a powerful one for its influence on our academic and student life today. And the other birthday is, of course, Martin Luther King Jr.'s, which we celebrate with a series of events this week, along with the rest of the nation. Professor Morel will have a lot more to say about the legacy of Reverend King in just a few minutes. But let me return to that thought about the irony and complexity of history. The proximity of the birthdays of King and Lee causes, indeed forces, those of us on this campus and in this town to reflect on 2 of the most significant times in this nation's history: the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement. It was King who frequently reminded us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. What a long arc it was, from the nation's founding to the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement. And while that arc may still bend towards justice, we know it doesn't on its own accord, and that our work remains unfinished. The calendar gods have compelled those of us at Washington and Lee to think long and hard this week, as we do each year, about the sometimes painful bending of that arc. As an institution of higher learning, we embrace the complexity of history. We don't shrink from critically examining it, including critically examining our own history. In our best moments, we are not like the faint of heart who deal with complexity by fleeing from it, by resorting either to caricatures of the past or by filtering the past through an ideological lens. Either coping mechanism makes life easier, you don't have to think as hard, but it cheapens history and defines it down rather than elevating it. I'm quite confident that the words you are about to hear from our speaker will elevate history and exemplify one of those best moments. Professor Lucas Morel is the class of 1960 professor of ethics and politics and head of the politics department at W&L, where he's taught since 1999. He teaches American government, political philosophy, constitutional law, Black American politics, and the politics of literature, and has research interest in Abraham Lincoln and Ralph Ellison. He received his PhD and MA from the Claremont Graduate University and a BA cum laude from Claremont McKenna College. He is the author of Lincoln's Sacred Effort, Defining Religion's Role in American Self-Government, and the editor of Ralph Ellison and the Raft of Hope, a political companion to the Invisible Man. He just completed an edited volume of scholarly essays entitled Lincoln for the Ages, the challenge of his political thought and practice, and is a contributing co-editor with one Mark Connor of another forthcoming book, The New Territory, Ralph Ellison in the 21st Century. He has consulted on exhibits at the Library of Congress on Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, and co-written lessons on antebellum and Civil War America and the Civil Rights Movement. He also conducts history workshops for high school teachers throughout the country. He is a gifted teacher, a creative scholar, and a wonderful colleague. The title of his talk is Ever Mindful of the Past, Building an Honorable Community. Please join me in welcoming our colleague, Lucas Morel.
Thank you, President Ruscio, for those kind remarks. Always a tough act to follow. We extend a special welcome to the parents of our soon-to-be student initiates of ODK and to our honorary ODK inductees. It is a privilege to speak before this assembly, to join the nation in celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day, to kick off the centennial year of Omicron Delta Kappa, and to do all this on a special day in the university calendar, our Founders Day. When I arrived at Washington and Lee University 15 years ago, I remember puzzling over the university motto, non incautus futuri. Didn't know that it was drawn from the Lee family crest. I was just put off by the double negative. Not unmindful of the future. How about something a bit more positive? Not unmindful? Why not say what we are mindful of? But upon reflection, this cryptic saying suggests what is on our minds. In short, non incautus futuri, precisely because we are centrally concerned with the past. As a liberal arts college, regardless of the area of study, we believe there are things from the past worth exploring, worth reflecting upon, and therefore worth holding on to. To be truly liberal or open-minded in our thinking as professors and students, we should never assume that we know better than those who came before us, that we're smarter than those who are dead and supposedly gone. And so these old things, if you will, matter enough that we choose to preserve them, to consider them for the sake of the future. But it seems today all we care about, all we talk about, is the future. Cell phones are sold on the basis of being the next big thing. In politics, we've fallen into the habit of expecting our elected officials to offer a vision for the future. In his re-election bid for the presidency, Bill Clinton declared, "We do not need to build a bridge to the past. We need to build a bridge to the future." President George H.W. Bush achieved notoriety for not being comfortable with what he called the vision thing. And when someone wants to disparage an idea, making it sound old-fashioned, all they have to do is say, "Oh, you just want to turn back the clock." In our progressive times, the new is automatically assumed to be improved. Better, simply because it came later. This was not how Martin Luther King Jr. approached the challenges of his day. While not unmindful of the future, King explored America's past and discovered there important principles he believed could help the nation move forward. With a mind full of the past, King gave speeches that invited Americans to consider their current practices in light of old truths. To help us build an honorable community, a nation that lived up to what we said on paper, King made a habit of reminding us of the past. But building an honorable community is no easy task. Honor itself is a slippery concept. So much of what goes into defining it is relative to what a community holds dear, which isn't always good. Moreover, what honor calls for depends on the circumstances. And in a time of crisis, the honorable path isn't always clear. King found clarity and thought the nation could find clarity by returning to its founding. When King yearned for the day when the South would recognize what he called its real, its true heroes, he lauded those in the civil rights movement who acted not just with courage and conscience, but also with a devotion to what he called the best in the American dream. And this implies that the American dream is a rather broad aspiration, which may very well include things that not every American would favor. King thereby makes room for folks in the heritage, not hate crowd. But his implicit challenge is for them to think through to those aspects of the American dream that are truly the best. King found them in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, what he called a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. In his I Have a Dream speech, despite having experienced solitary confinement for marching in Birmingham, despite witnessing police dogs and fire hoses set upon black youth simply because they were protesting for citizenship rights, despite seeing Governor George Wallace physically blocking black students from entering the University of Alabama, King declared that he still had a dream. He said his dream was deeply rooted in the American dream, not identical with the American dream, but intimately connected with it. For his dream ultimately was the creation of what he called a beloved community. We've all watched King's I Have a Dream speech, seen the black and white footage at the Lincoln Memorial. Recall the introduction by A. Philip Randolph, an elder statesman of the civil rights movement who first came up with the idea of a march on Washington way back during World War II, when black Americans served in a segregated army, while at home, many blacks were closed out of jobs in wartime industries. Randolph introduced King as the moral leader of our nation. What led that old champion of the struggle to introduce King as the country's conscience? I think it had to do with King's ability, yes, to foresee a better future for the country, but also to dream in a manner informed by the past. King's iconic speech, like his letter from a Birmingham jail, written earlier that same year, invited the nation to look back to her past, reclaim important promises, recover saving principles that held the key to the nation's progress. In his first inaugural address, President Clinton announced that our democracy must be not only the envy of the world, but the engine of our own renewal. There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America. In his I Have a Dream speech, King mentioned old ideas that happened to be right, and he reminded America of the best in our heritage. as a way to motivate us to fulfill, to bring to fruition our nation's promise. King took Americans back to a slaveholder, Thomas Jefferson, who still found it necessary to justify his own freedom, not by referring to his color or his race, but to his membership in the human family. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. King took us back to some old patriotic songs. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. Most memorable of all, King concluded his most famous speech by taking us back to the slave songs. Free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. King wasn't embarrassed to identify himself with the freedmen of old, black American slaves whose longing for freedom was finally seconded by a nation that had long claimed it to be the birthright of all human beings. King turned that praise song into a new national anthem, and he invited all of God's children, black and white together, to join hands and sing the words of an old Negro spiritual. Yes, for white Americans to be truly free, King thought they needed to learn the words of those old songs. As we all know, King also thought that building an honorable community required nonviolence as a means, because the end he sought, a beloved community, was nonviolent. Nonviolence, King wrote, demands that the means we use must be as pure as the ends we seek. As a preacher of the Christian faith, he believed that a beloved community would include former enemies. He wasn't interested in defeating his opponents, only the evil in which they were caught up in. King proclaimed the end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. And so to be a loving community required that one see the imago Dei, the image of God, even in those one would be tempted to hate. We see this if we go back to the event that launched King's career as the face of the modern civil rights movement. In 1955, we find him a newly invested preacher and a new dad, only 26 years old, but unanimously elected to lead a bold effort to boycott the segregated buses of Montgomery, Alabama. When it came time to name their grassroots organization, King and his cohorts did not call it the NIA, the Negro Improvement Association. They called it the MIA, the Montgomery Improvement Association. As King and the rank and file understood their mission, to desegregate buses would improve the lives not only of the black citizens of Montgomery, but the white citizens as well. Their lives would be better for living alongside blacks this way. King's leadership and personal sacrifice inspired many to step up as engaged citizens, even at the risk of losing jobs and their station in society. For we should remember that one of the hallmarks of the movement was the participation, the widespread participation of many middle-class Americans, a class who in previous generations would have seen demonstrating and boycotting and marching as something the hoi polloi, the riffraff do. King's own leadership was viewed by some blacks as irresponsible rabble-rousing and a detriment to the struggle for civil rights. Sometimes with leadership comes unpopularity, and with it what King described as the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer. This pioneer loneliness was also experienced by a man in whose symbolic shadow King delivered his most famous speech. Abraham Lincoln, like King, addressed a national crisis by taking the nation back in time in order to help it move forward. For Lincoln, building an honorable community meant not just bringing a devastating civil war to an end. It would require that the former combatants, in the words of his sublime second inaugural address, do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace. This exhortation could only make sense if Lincoln was successful in persuading all Americans that the preservation of the Union and the end of slavery were legitimate outcomes of that war. Lincoln's second inaugural address taught the nation that they needed to come to terms with the past and to arrive at a common understanding of it, a common understanding of a devastating war and the monumental social change that resulted from it, the emancipation of almost 4 million Black American slaves. As Lincoln prepared his second inaugural address, he faced the problem of a defeated but defiant South. Though beaten on the battlefield, many Southerners were unwilling to accept the imminent Union victory as a just conclusion of the war. As Johnny Reb might have put it, Lincoln's might didn't make it right. The newly re-elected president would have to find words to justify what federal troops had accomplished by force of arms. The problem was that victory for the Union cause came not only at the expense of much blood and treasure, but also through the abolition of slavery. The war may have seemed long, but slavery, Black slavery, had been around much longer. And the white supremacist mindset that had built up around it would not give way easily. If racial slavery was somehow the cause of the war, as Lincoln put it, emancipation would make relations between blacks and whites the greatest challenge in restoring federal authority in the American South. But instead of detailing his plans for Reconstruction, Lincoln followed the model of his Gettysburg Address by delivering a speech that would be weighty but brief. Lincoln surprised his audience by rejecting the triumphalism of radical Republicans in Congress. They sought to rule over the defeated Southern states with a vengeance. And in the face of resistance spurred by Confederate President Jefferson Davis, who exhorted Southerners to stand to their arms, Lincoln famously counseled, with malice toward none, with charity for all. But he could only do so after addressing the justice of the war's end, which included the abolition of slavery by military coercion. Lincoln saw little hope of a truly united States of America without a united way of thinking about the place of slavery in American history. And so he not only rejected the South's defense of slavery as a positive good, but also the North's assumption that they bore no responsibility for the peculiar institution. Instead, Lincoln used his second inaugural address to propose a common public memory of the war and American slavery as the basis for restoring national unity. He did this by studiously avoiding any specifics about whether the so-called seceded states had actually left the federal union, how they would be restored to the Union, or what the rights of the freedmen or the rebels, for that matter, would be under their returning governments. More important than a detailed agenda of the future was a careful review of the past. What was the meaning of the conflict, and how could this understanding help heal the wounds of a divided nation? Lincoln points out that both the war and emancipation came to the country despite the initial intentions of either side of the conflict. With surprising humility for a re-elected president, he concludes each side looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding: another power must be at work. Remarkably, Lincoln appeals to the God of nations, but without claiming that his purposes were identical to Lincoln's. The Almighty, Lincoln declares, has his own purposes. The fact that both sides read the same Bible and pray to the same God would seem to support a providential reading of the war. However, the nation's common religion did not produce a common view of slavery. Debate over its legitimacy and its future in the American Republic is precisely what led to the Civil War. So Lincoln tries to produce a common understanding of the war by withholding judgment from the South alone for the evil of slavery. He supposes that slavery was an offense that came due to both Southern and Northern citizens, and one that God now wills to remove through this mighty scourge of war. Notice that Lincoln does not say that he knows the long and bloody conflict was divine punishment for the national sin of slavery. He simply invites Americans, North and South, to accept this interpretation as the best explanation for a war no one really wanted and an emancipation no one seriously expected. Lincoln diminishes the culpability of the South for the Civil War because a just and a lasting peace among ourselves depended on blame for slavery being shared by all Americans. But Lincoln could not ignore or dismiss the issue entirely, for he now sought to preserve the Union as an emancipated Union. As he declared at Gettysburg, he intended all Americans, North and South, black and white, former slave and former master, to experience a new birth of freedom. Lincoln thought that building an honorable community after all they had experienced would require no less. So rebellious Southerners would not be held solely responsible for causing the war, but a reunited States would require that Southerners change their mind about slavery, and hence the meaning of America. Lincoln hoped the nation would now be in practice what it long declared in principle, a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. The failure of Reconstruction would postpone Lincoln's hopes for almost a century. That is, until what historian Taylor Branch called the King years. After his second inauguration, Lincoln wrote that he expected his address to wear as well as, perhaps better than, anything I have produced, but I believe it is not immediately popular. He explained, men are not flattered by being shown that there has been a difference of purpose between the Almighty and them. To deny it, however, in this case is to deny that there is a God governing the world. Lincoln was humbled by this providential account of the Civil War, and he thought that due humility on his part, astonishing for a victorious commander-in-chief, would set a fitting example for a divinely chastened people. As you might have noticed with these two great figures from American history, Lincoln and King set the bar high for themselves and for this nation. That's what leaders do. That's what makes them inspiring. What they think we can achieve, especially in the midst of trying circumstances. Lincoln's lesson, of course, is a cautionary tale. His second inaugural address pointed the way, but having helped the nation survive one crisis, the rebellion, and the ensuing Civil War, he did not live to lead us, to guide us through another crisis, the trials of Reconstruction. Likewise, King's letter from a Birmingham jail and his I Have a Dream speech challenged America to rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. He prepared the way for the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. But, as he said, though he made it to the mountaintop, King did not live to see us through to the promised land, to see us through to his beloved community. Nevertheless, as John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail, we can't guarantee success, but we can deserve it. Here we do well to remember the words of our alma mater. When we doubt our future's course, our honor sets us free. In times of national soul-searching, King was our conscience, and Lincoln called forth the better angels of our nature. They demonstrated that true leadership is not just about casting a vision for the future, but having a clear sense of what's worth holding onto from the past. They recalled what was good in the nation's past that could help us become a people more worthy of our free government. For both of these great Americans, progress required looking back in order to move forward. But make no mistake, this is no lapse into nostalgia. We should have both the courage and humility to remember difficult times as a way to improve our current situation. Tragically, with the death recently of a student, we've been forced to ask the question, can we do better to ensure that these sorts of accidents never happen again? A student directed me to a blog by a WNL alum who heard of the accident. She offered a tender consolation. She closed with an arresting, but I think productive exhortation. Do something with your grief. That was the best thing I heard anyone say or write about the crash and our collective response to it. It was her way of saying that we did well to hold a vigil, to remember Kelsey Durkin, but to walk away from that vigil and return to our daily lives without being changed by her death, to return to normalcy would not do her memory justice. What would it mean to be not unmindful of the future as we deal with our grief over what happened? Is there a WNL way to do this? Do something with your grief. That works for me. I think it can work for us, even as it suggests that while we remember Kelsey, we also remember things we'd rather forget. It will require that we strive not to forget or neglect certain things because they cause discomfort. To make a better future, to build a more honorable community, will require that we reflect upon events from the past that may not reflect well on us, whether as a school or as individual members of this special community. One uncomfortable episode from our university's past happens to involve Martin Luther King Jr. In 1961, WNL students invited King to lead a seminar on Christian ideals. But when the Board of Trustees was asked permission to bring King to campus, the trustees said no. Talk about a missed opportunity. What would leadership have looked like then? A new book, Ebony and Ivy, Race, Slavery, and the Troubled History of America's Universities, chronicles the extent to which slavery was intertwined with the development of American universities from the colonial period through the early 19th century, including what was then known as Liberty Hall and then Washington College. The fact that WNL is no longer a segregated university, no longer an all-male university, the fact that for 15 years I've been able to bring Lincoln to the land of Lee. Given our history, these are no minor milestones for an institution that's been around since 1749. Honesty about our past, as President Rousseau noted, must be part of our mission as a liberal arts university if our commitment to honor and integrity and civility are to mean anything. I think this is what is so troubling about the way folks try to remember and honor the old South. Yes, I'm going there. You know, the t-shirts, the bumper stickers, the banners that say heritage, not hate. The earnest efforts at flying the rebel flag as a way to remember relatives who fought in the so-called War of Northern Aggression. The hasty disclaimers about how their people never owned slaves. They didn't fight for all that, just fought for states' rights. Sorry, I'm slipping into my wife's Tennessee accent. We're fighting for our rats. It's precisely what's missing when citizens of Virginia at least divide over celebrating Lee Jackson Day or Martin Luther King Jr. Day. this public schizophrenia about who we are, what we value as a community, as a so-called commonwealth, is really disappointing. What poverty of thinking this represents, what absence of love and charity. When I first arrived at Washington and Lee, I saw a car with a bumper sticker that said, "If at first you don't secede, ... That's clever. But as we Civil War buffs like to say, the North thinks the war is over, but the South thinks it's halftime. So I respect the desire to honor one's ancestors, especially as they displayed the courage of their convictions. And yet, so many years after a war that could have killed self-government, so many 1,000 gone, whose unrequited toil an American president paused to acknowledge during an inauguration address to pay his humble respects. Surely we can find a way to hold on to worthy aspects of our past in a manner that at least tries to unite rather than divide us. For starters, maybe we should reclaim the distinction between the public and the private. Surely what the Commonwealth of Virginia honors and celebrates should be something all of her citizens can agree is true to history, worthy of the public's respect. Insisting that respect for one person's heritage or one group's version of history requires a public expression, something the government of all must support for the sake of a few, seems to neglect a genuine concern for the good of all. As Lincoln once put it, there is no Washington in that. And I wonder if there is any Lee, any President Robert E. Lee in that. In the last year of his life, George Washington wrote a letter to Patrick Henry, urging him to run for political office, whether in Congress or their home state of Virginia. Washington worried, quote, that the most respectable and best qualified characters amongst us will not come forward, easy and happy in their circumstances at home, believing themselves secure in their liberties and property, will not forsake them or their occupations and engage in the turmoil of public business or expose themselves to the calumnies of their opponents whose weapons are detraction. Washington added, ought characters who are best able to rescue their country from the pending evil to remain at home? Rather, ought they not to come forward and by their talents and influence stand in the breach and oppose the widening of it? Washington, of course, preached what he had already been practicing for the better part of his public life. He goes on to add that the leadership of one, such as Patrick Henry, would be critical not simply because of his own virtues, but because of how it would influence other politicians, in addition to fellow citizens back home. He noted it would be a rallying point for the timid and an attraction for the wavering. This kind of leadership both draws followers and shapes the actions of other leaders. To you students, who will now be inducted into the Alpha Circle of Omicron Delta Kappa, we recognize what you have accomplished so far, as well as your promise, what we expect you to achieve after you depart from dear old W&L. My hope is that having shown leadership, you will continue to serve the greater community by pointing the way forward in your respective fields and doing so, at least in part, by looking back to your time here, back even further to history, to people, events, ideals worthy of your respect and ours. Being ever mindful of the past, may this enable you to lead us in building an honorable community, challenge us to make our own distinctive contributions to what King called a beloved community. Thank you.
Well, he nailed it. Lucas sent me a copy of his remarks last night and said, if you want to take a look, please do. And I said, nah, I think you'll be okay. And sure enough. Thank you very much, Lucas, for those very thoughtful and well-framed remarks. Founders Day, as I mentioned before, is also a time for us to recognize several individuals for fulfilling the ideals of leadership and service. We do so by inducting them into Omicron Delta Kappa, the National Leadership Honor Society. Alvin Thomas will lead us for that program. If you asked Alvin to write an essay on how he spent his summer vacation, here's what he would have written. I spent last summer working in Rwanda with Engineering World Health, an NGO that works to improve the quality of healthcare in resource-poor communities by utilizing the biomedical engineering community. I repaired broken medical equipment for a district hospital and several rural health clinics near Gisenyi, Rwanda. I also trained local hospital staff on basic medical instrument repair and developed a design proposal for an affordable calibration device that could be used in rural health clinic laboratories. Just another summer vacation by a college student. A member of the class of 2014, Alvin is a chemistry and engineering major with a minor in poverty studies. He is a Johnson Scholar, a Levy Neuroscience Research Scholar, and a member of the National Biology Honor Society. A Bonner Scholar, Alvin has served on the leadership team of Campus Kitchen and an alternative breaks chair of the Neighbor Service League. He is the class of 2014 representative on our executive committee, which of course administers the honor system here, is a member of the General's Christian Fellowship, and has held leadership roles in Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity. And in that free time that he has so much of, he is the robotics program director at Lilburn Downing Middle School. Next year, he'll pursue graduate work in public health. Alvin was inducted into ODK as a junior and currently is its president. Alvin Thomas.
Thank you, President Ruscio. I, too, would like to welcome our distinguished guests, students, families, and friends as we gather to celebrate the extraordinary accomplishments of our new initiates and anticipate their continued excellence in leadership and service, both here at Washington and Lee and in various communities throughout the world. Today, America observes Martin Luther King Jr. Day. As a national day of service, Americans from all walks of life choose to engage in service that hosts the potential to empower individuals, strengthen communities, bridge barriers, create solutions to social problems, and move us closer to Dr. King's vision of a beloved community. Today, while encouraging engagement in service, we also celebrate the leadership of students, faculty, alumni, and community members who have devoted themselves to serving their communities and our nation. At Washington Lee, we observe Founders Day on or near the birthday of Robert E. Lee. President Ruscio once said that this event reminds us of Lee's most enduring legacy, a particular kind of leadership, one with integrity, honor, and service to others as defining qualities. A century ago, a select group of 15 Washington Lee student and faculty leaders founded Omicron Delta Kappa, ODK, to bring together leaders involved in various phases of college activities for the general good of the institution. Since its founding, the Society has sought to honor those students, faculty, alumni, and community members who best demonstrate exemplary leadership rooted in strong character. As the Alpha Circle of ODK, we continue to emphasize this high caliber of leadership by recognizing those with deep-seated commitment to continued active participation in the Washington Lee community, strong spiritual and moral character, and service to the campus, community, and world. We are confident that our initiates will continue to demonstrate outstanding leadership in the 5 areas recognized by the Society: scholarship, athletics, service, journalism, and the arts. Many of our initiates excel in more than one of these fields, while others represent incredible depth within a single sphere. These initiates will continue in the tradition of our founders and serve to improve the world around us through honorable, innovative, and moral leadership. I am incredibly humbled by both the previous accomplishments and future potential of our student initiates honored here today. We will also welcome our honorary initiates to the Alpha Circle: Lorraine Osley, Sydney Evans, Alan Ernestine Hockaday, and Eddie and Doris Neighbors. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our honorary initiates for their unwavering commitment to the ideals of ODK, for their resolute leadership even in difficult times, and for the legacy that they have created that will guide Washington Lee students for generations to come. By their induction today into the Alpha Circle, we recognize that our honorary initiates have succeeded in demonstrating true leadership, unifying the trifecta of personal integrity, an inner zeal to understand and transform, and an external genius for motivating others in the pursuit of a shared purpose. I look forward to seeing your leadership continue to positively influence the world around us. Thank you. We will now recognize each of our initiates and invite them to the stage for the traditional tapping ceremony. I will begin today with our honorary initiates. I will call each of them to the stage individually, and I ask that you hold your applause until all have been introduced. Lorraine E. Osley is a successful lawyer and dedicated public servant. She graduated from Randolph-Macon Women's College with a BA and from Washington Lee with a JD. She has held several high-ranking positions in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, including Special Advisor to HUD Secretary Andrew Cuomo. She has also served as Chief of Staff to Florida's Lieutenant Governor Buddy McKay. In 2000, Osley was elected to the Florida House of Representatives, where she served until retirement due to term limits in 2008. There, she developed an expertise in healthcare and education and became a leading advocate for children's issues. Osley is of the counsel to the law firm Holloman PA of Tallahassee, as well as the Southern Director for Project New America, a national research and strategy firm. For Washington Lee, she is a board member of the George Washington Society, an emerita member of the W&L Law Council, and past president of the Tallahassee Alumni Chapter. Sydney Springfield Evans is a leader in the university. She currently is the Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students at Washington Lee. She earned a BA in History at Vanderbilt University and a JD from the University of Memphis School of Law. She joined Washington Lee in 2000 as Director of Admission in the law school and was later named Associate Dean for Law Student Services. Here at W&L, she has chaired the task force review of the grievance policy. She is also chair of the Student Affairs Committee and a member of the Faculty Executive Committee, University Athletics, University Board of Appeals, and the Automatic Rule and Reinstatement Committee. She has served on the 8th District Disciplinary Committee for the Virginia State Bar and is a member of the National Alumni Board of the Hotchkiss School. Al N. Hockaday and Ernestine Hockaday work individually and as a team to serve their community. They own Shenandoah Attic and Victorian Parlor on Main Street here in Lexington. They arrived in Lexington when Sergeant Major Hockaday came to the Virginia Military Institute to train cadets. Mr. Hockaday has received more than 20 military awards, including the Purple Heart with Gold Star. He is a charter member and the paymaster of the Marine Corps League Detachment 1351, the Rockbridge Patriots. The Hockadays have raised significant funds for wounded warrior programs in Virginia and the Marine Corps. Mr. Hockaday serves on the board of directors of the College Orientation Workshop, which mentors at-risk African American men in high school. Mrs. Hockaday has served on the boards of the Chamber of Commerce, Historic Lexington Foundation, Project Horizon, and the Lexington Marine Corps League Auxiliary. Eddie O. Neighbors and Doris R. Neighbors have devoted more than a decade to improving the lives of citizens of Birmingham and to nurturing the work of students, faculty, staff, and alumni at Washington and Lee. Mr. Neighbors teaches accounting at the University of Alabama at Birmingham and is a deacon at their Baptist church. Mrs. Neighbor volunteers with Better Basics, an organization dedicated to young children. They are known to generations of Washington Lee students for their involvement with the Neighbor Service League, a student-led organization that promotes civic engagement. The Neighbor Service League was established in 1999 by the classmates of Jonathan Neighbor's class of 2002 to honor his memory following the tragic deaths of Jonathan and his sister Leah in January of that year. The Neighbors sustained their son's legacy by returning to campus for Neighbor Service Day twice every year and for hosting students at alternative break trips in Birmingham. They have also supported the WNL Campus Kitchen and serve on the Shepherd Alumni Advisory Committee. Please join me in congratulating our honorary initiates. We will now recognize our student initiates. I call your attention to the program in which you will find a detailed listing of their many and varied accomplishments. I will begin by welcoming our student initiates from the senior undergraduate class. Mary Ashley Bowles. Hillary F. Cooper. Melissa M. Derby. Catherine E. Driest. David N. Fishman. Trevor T. Hatcher. Lauren N. Howry. Lauren I. Kasoff. Joseph Liu. Isabella G. Martin. Brian F. Mulady. Cindy Rivas Musia. Mark A. Sawinski. Laura Lindsay Tatum. Kane Thomas. And Thomas C. Wolf. Please join me in congratulating our student initiates. And now for the student initiates from the junior undergraduate class. Caroline C. Krishla Ball. Roger Thomas Day, Jr. Jane M. Fugate. Jillian N. Catterhagen. Catherine H. Lemasters. Bayan C. Misagi. And Daniel J. Rebalt. Please join me in congratulating our junior undergraduate initiates. And now for the student initiates from the Washington and Lee University School of Law. From the law class of 2014, Kyle A. Dolinsky. Laura E. Erdman. Megan E. Flynn. Laura D. Goss. Kyle F. Hoffman. Ryan M. Roback. Kara E. Reagan. From the law class of 2015, George M. Mackey V. Crystal B. Swensbo. And Paul M. Wiley. Please, please join me in congratulating our excellent law initiates. In honor of the centennial celebration of ODK, I ask that all members of ODK present here today stand and be recognized. Thank you. I wish to offer a final congratulations to all our ODK honorees and student initiates. Thank you again for all that you do for Washington and Lee.
Well, and I offer my congratulations as well to the new initiates, especially, I guess it's not insignificant that it's the 100th year anniversary that you are being inducted today. And I ask our new initiates, too, to take a look at our honorary initiates and the life that they have led. And I offer them my congratulations. Alan Ernestine Hockaday, Eddie and Doris Neighbors, my colleague Sydney Evans, and our distinguished alumna, Lauren Asley. So take inspiration from their accomplishments and set your sights high. We will be watching with great interest as you grow as university leaders, as well as leaders in your professions and in the communities in the years to come. I'd ask everyone to now please stand as the chamber singers perform the Washington Lee hymn, and we are adjourned after the completion of that hymn. We are adjourned.